Last of Us, Season 1, Episode 9, the very last episode of this season. We begin the episode, and we see this pregnant woman running through the woods, and it's clear that she is in active labor, and she's being chased by at least one infected person. She runs into this abandoned house. Nobody else is there, although she seemed to be expecting people. She runs upstairs and barricades herself in a room. An infected person breaks in and bites her. She proceeds to have the baby. After this, we see Marlene show up. It's obvious that this baby is Ellie, and this is why she is immune. At least that's what it seems to be. We have Ellie's mother handing Ellie off to Marlene, and then we go back to the present with Joel and Ellie. They are scavenging while they are on their way to the hospital in Salt Lake City. And it is obvious that Ellie is not okay after everything she's been through. Joel will talk to her, and Ellie isn't paying attention. He has to try hard to get her attention. The pathway is blocked, so they have to do what they've done before, go through buildings and try to find a way around. As they are going through the building on their way trying to get around, Ellie encounters some giraffes, which was actually a pretty neat scene. So I actually enjoyed that quite a bit. As they were approaching the hospital, Joel stopped Ellie and told her that they could just turn around and go back. That they didn't have to continue. They didn't have to go to the hospital. And Ellie responded by telling him that if they stopped now, then everything that she'd been through, everything that she'd done would have been for nothing. And she needed to make all of that mean something, which was why she was continuing on. After that, they are walking down a street. They're on their way to the hospital. They are attacked. Joel is knocked unconscious. The next thing we see, he wakes up in the hospital. Marlene is there. She tells him that Ellie has been taken to surgery and that they are going to escort him to the city limits and he should be on his way. And if he tries to resist, they're going to shoot him. The problem is that in order to get the sample that they want to try to make a vaccine from Ellie, they're going to have to take some brain tissue, which will involve killing her. Joel is not okay with that, especially since Ellie was unaware that this is what's actually going to happen. Marlene says that if it was up to Ellie, she would make the decision to go ahead and do this. Joel obviously disagrees. So he kills both the guys who were escorting him out of the hospital, and he kills everyone who gets in his way to get back to Ellie. He lets the two nurses who were about to help with the operation live, but he shoots the doctor right in the head, and he picks up an unconscious Ellie. He is in the parking garage on his way out of there when he encounters Marlene. He shoots her too and loads Ellie into the car and drives away. By the time Ellie wakes up, all of this is over. He then proceeds to lie to her and tell her that there were dozens of people like her. They've been unable to make a vaccine from these other people, so they have given up trying.
When she asked about Marlene, he just stared out and there was no answer.
They're standing above the town, and we see the river and everything down there. And Ellie stops him and tells him that she wasn't alone when she got bitten, that her best friend Riley had been there, and that she was the one who had to put down Riley when she changed. That was the first person that she lost. And then after that came Tess. After that came Sam. Ellie is suffering from survivor's guilt after the loss of everyone else that she's lost. Tess, Riley, Sam. She is trying to figure out how to live with all of that. And then she asks Joel to swear that what he said about the fireflies was true. He lies right to her face and says yes. Not sure she really believed him, but she just said okay. That brings us up to the question, was Joel right or wrong to stop them from killing Ellie to get that sample to try to make a vaccine?
The question I have, because I agree with you, that was the philosophical question here. Marlene was strongly suggesting that Ellie would agree that this is the way that needs to happen. She needs to die for the cure to happen. My question I have is, did Ellie come up with that idea on her own, Or was that some bullshit that Marlene was feeding her for most of her life? Because, again, this was open-ended, so this isn't like this was stated. But in the flashback in the TV show, Marlene at first didn't want to kill, I think Anna was the mother's name. Mm-hmm. She didn't want to kill Anna, but then she eventually did. And you could tell they were friends before, at the very least. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just wondering if Marlene was feeding her bullshit, and a kid's going to absorb that stuff if you're being told, essentially, you're going to be the Messiah for all of us later, and you hold some resentment that the child was the reason that somebody died, even though it wasn't. I don't know that's the case, but if that was the case, then is Joel lying about what happened to Marlene really wrong? I mean, I don't know the answer to that either, but if Marlene lied to Ellie to begin with and was setting her up with all this bullshit, was it wrong for Joel then to lie to try to fix what Marlene did to Ellie?
Well, plus in the flashback, we saw Anna kill that infected person with the same knife that Ellie has. When she tried to give Ellie to Marlene, Marlene at first didn't want to take the baby. Anna lied to Marlene and told her that she'd already cut the cord when she got bit. Good for Anna. She did the right thing. So Marlene eventually did take Ellie and the knife. I thought that it was good that Joel took that same knife and was using that to defend Ellie and get her out of there, because he did actually take out one person with the knife as he was trying to get to Ellie in the hospital to save her. So I thought that was fitting.
The conversation that Ellie and Joel had at the end, I'm assuming they were back at that compound where Tommy and his wife are at the end of the episode. So that conversation Ellie and Joel had when Ellie was like, well, I have to make this all mean something. Again, that makes me wonder, is that just Marlene's bullshit that was put on Ellie through Ellie growing up? Maybe somebody knows, maybe there was an expansion pack that explains this, and maybe I'm way wrong. But just based on what I've seen in the TV episode. Oh, and by the way, the video game, except not having that beginning scene with Anna giving birth to Ellie, the video game pretty much followed the same thing as the TV show.
Yeah, the only real differences were the infected attacks that happened in the video game that we didn't see happening at all in the TV show.
There was one significant scene that I think I disagree with them taking it out. In the video game, when they were heading to the hospital, they were traversing different obstacles, including buses and cars in a river or something with fast-moving water. And as Joel was moving across, he fell into this bus. And then Ellie, we know Ellie can't swim, but Ellie risked being scared of water to help save Joel coming out of the bus. She got sucked into the stream and they both went, I guess, downstream. Joel came out of the water and pulled Ellie out, and Ellie was essentially dead, and he was resuscitating her with CPR, and he was really frantic about bringing her back to life. The reason I think that matters is because in the TV show, what happened was Joel was like, hey, you know what I'm in the mood for? Some bad puns. And so Ellie pulls out that pun book, and then somebody behind Joel hits him in the back of the head and knocks him out. To me, that scene meant something because it showed in the video game that Joel was frantically trying to keep Ellie alive. You could tell he was forming basically this was a second daughter to him. Not only tied back to just the whole series, but that one scene where he was trying to revive her frantically. I wish they would have kept that in there because I think that added to why Joel made the decision that he did. Because when he was going back for Ellie, that was a pretty badass scene in the TV show. In the video game it was too, but he killed far more people in the TV show. He was going through that hospital. Even one guy was trying to surrender and he put his gun down, and Joel would have none of that. He just took him out as he was heading toward Ellie. That switch flipped in the back of his head and he was going to save Ellie at all costs.
Yeah, that was a great scene. I know some people have complained that, it was just too easy for him to just walk right through there, didn't get a scratch on him, and he killed all those people, and they're supposedly these well-trained mercenaries or whatever the hell they are. And it's just like, nah. Marlene just said she lost all these guys trying to get across the country.
You're supposed to protect us. You're the police. It's your job. Where are your men?
My men? My men are shit.
Joel managed to get there without losing Ellie. So she admitted already that Joel was way better than her guys because she kept asking how he did it.
When Joel woke up in the hospital bed and Marlene asked, how did you get here? Because it took all my men to come out here. And then Joel said, basically, it was Ellie. She was very determined to get out here. But then in the TV show, I don't think this was said in the video game, Marlene said, well, you're the last person I'd want to owe something to. Mm-hmm. And I think there's an implication that Marlene knew how dangerous Joel could be.
Yeah. So, I mean, I thought that was a fantastic scene when he went through the hospital. Nobody was going to stop him from saving Ellie. No one. And that included Marlene. Those 2 nurses, they got lucky that he didn't just shoot them too.
In the video game footage, the 2 nurses were killed, but that was part of game footage. They were surrendering, and I think it was up to the player of the video game if you were going to kill them or not. Mm-hmm. But the person we watched chose to kill the 2 nurses as well. But in the TV show, only the doctor was killed.
Another thing that was left out that we saw actually in the TV show that wasn't in the video game was this story about how Joel, apparently after he had lost Sarah, tried to kill himself. But then when he tried to shoot himself in the head, he flinched when he pulled the trigger. I think also, another thing that struck me is, well, how did Marlene actually get out there to Salt Lake City? That just seemed way too convenient to me.
Well, they left at about the same time, Joel and Marlene, from Boston. And yes, Joel and Ellie had some diversions, we'll say, but it seems like Marlene was there for a while and they were set up at that hospital. So what happened there? I mean, again, maybe it could be explained, well, she went directly there where Joel and Ellie stopped at that Tommy camp for a while and they visited Frank and Bill. You could argue that type of stuff happened that slowed them down, but it's just, I agree with you. It felt like they were there Marlene and her people were there for a long time, because I'm guessing, I think they're the ones set up at that Colorado hospital at first, and then when they got overran.
Well, it was Fireflies anyway, so yeah.
Then they got displaced and they had the clues to go to the Utah hospital.
Plus, it's like, well, if Marlene was heading out there anyway, why didn't she just take Ellie with her? That would have made a lot more sense.
Yeah, I don't get that either, because apparently Marlene had a bunch of people with her to protect the group to get out there. So yeah, why wouldn't you take Ellie? Again, I'm making up stuff here, but maybe she was hoping that Ellie wasn't going to make it out there.
Or we know that originally Joel and Tess were just supposed to deliver Ellie to those Fireflies right outside the city. So maybe Marlene was supposed to meet them out there herself and they were all going to go at that point in time. I don't know. The other weird thing was, why didn't Marlene ask where Tess was?
Yeah, it's like she didn't care. Again, I'm making this up, my own narrative here, and I could be way wrong, but I just wonder if Marlene didn't want to even raise Ellie, didn't want this to work, would be happy if Ellie died. Again, maybe I'm wrong, but just the way the narrative was set up, I could come up with a narrative where maybe that was the case.
And it was weird. If Marlene had cared so much about Ellie's mother, and Ellie's mother had given Ellie to Marlene, how did Ellie end up basically a ward of the state in the Fedra cadet program?
Yeah, there's pieces here that just make me think that Marlene was just doing this as the dying wish of her friend, and that was it. Like, she held some resentment toward Ellie, so she wasn't going to kill Ellie, but she was just going to do everything she could to make that girl's life miserable.
Well, plus, how good a friend was she that she left her 9-month pregnant friend alone to go into the city, and then she didn't make it back in time, and her friend ends up getting bitten while she's giving birth. Marlene strikes me as not a nice person.
And maybe we're misreading this. Somebody might come back in the comments and say, oh yeah, well, if you would have went ahead and downloaded this DLC, it explains all this. And by the way, please do share. We're just going with what we saw on screen and what video game footage we did watch. And based on that is why we're having questions about Marlene. One other thing I want to mention, and this is just a quick because it just worked out this week, that the last episode of Star Trek Picard, one of the themes they were trying to push was Captain Shaw's survival guilt. And we both thought that was shoved in there. They were stealing Sisko's story. But I believed when Ellie was talking to Joel toward the end of the episode about all those people who died, including Riley, I really think that I believe that Ellie did have survivor's guilt and that there was an interesting conversation to be had here. Because then Joel's response to that was, none of those people was your fault for dying. You just have to find different things to live for. You can't keep dwelling on the past like that. That was the right way to do survivor's guilt. Not in Star Trek Picard, what they tried to do with Captain Shaw.
Yeah, so clearly this was a much better example of someone dealing with survivor's guilt than what we saw on Star Trek Picard. And it's interesting that they had a 14-year-old girl in this story And she understood these things much better than Shaw, who had been dealing with his survivor's guilt for the last 30 years and then taking it out on Picard, which just comes back to just how poorly written Star Trek Picard was. Because, yeah, like the old man said, she was looking to Joel for advice on how to keep going after everything she'd been through. He told her, you just have to find something to survive for. Joel said that it wasn't time that heals the wounds. The implication was that what had finally allowed him to heal was letting go of Sarah and making room in his life for Ellie. That is what allowed Joel to finally let go of the past. Because he had been spending all of this time, the last 20 years, not allowing himself to care about anyone that way again, because he didn't want to lose somebody else. It seemed like in this episode, the writers definitely had a better grasp on dealing with the trauma and loss than the people who are writing for Star Trek Picard.
The fact that a 14-year-old girl character was dealing with survivor's guilt in what I would consider to be a mature themed way. But Captain Shaw, who I'm guessing is in his 40s, that he was dealing with this like he was a 14-year-old kid. Like he wasn't emotionally grown up inside. I don't want to make this a Star Trek Picard review again, but we just watched that episode and they were trying to push survivor's guilt as one of the themes, and people were like, that was just wonderful how they tackled the topic. No, it wasn't wonderful. What they did in this series, that's wonderful. That's how you deal with survivor's guilt.
Yeah, and the trauma of what Ellie had been put through. Yeah, she basically understood that for her to be able to deal with it all, she had to give meaning to what she'd been through. She had to make it count for something. On the other hand, Shaw was just sitting in his quarters, just, I don't know, pouting after 30 years.
Yeah, then he went to the holodeck and then took it out on Picard. And
this is the difference between juvenile writing and adult writing. The way that these two different characters handled dealing with survivor's guilt. Perfect example. So if people question what we're talking about when we're talking about, well, why do you think this is written for tweens? This is why. Because...
this meaning Star Trek Picard.
Yes. 40-year-old or 47-year-old or whatever, however old Captain Shaw is, dealing with trauma from 30 years ago, the way he was behaving, that's the way you would expect a teenager or a kid to behave. Not a grown adult who's had 30 years to deal with this stuff, especially in Starfleet. You'd think you'd get the best psychological care there was. However, on The Last of Us, you see how Ellie and Joel are dealing with their trauma, and that was far more realistic than what we got from Star Trek. This last part was extremely well done. I have to say, from my perspective, if asked whether or not I thought Joel was correct in what he did, I would say yes. Yes, he was. Because overall, she's a 14-year-old kid. She's been traumatized. She can't make a good decision right now as to whether or not to let somebody else end her life so that they can maybe make a cure, maybe a vaccine, maybe. So it was on Joel to protect her, and he did, and that was the right thing to do. So what do you guys think about this? Did you like this last episode? What are your thoughts on what Joel did? And if you also watch Star Trek Picard, what are your thoughts on comparing Captain Shaw and Ellie and the survivor's guilt in the two different situations? Which one do you think was more realistic? Let us know in the comments below.
Take care.